Imagine walking into a McDonald's, craving a simple meal, only to be met with something unexpected, tension thick in the air, whispers behind the counter, and a situation that no one saw coming. That's exactly what happened when former President Donald Trump stepped into a local McDonald's for a quick bite. But this wasn't just any ordinary visit. It quickly turned into a moment that revealed more than just customer service. It exposed something deeper. Trump, known for his love of fast food, walked in with his usual confidence, scanning the menu like he had done countless times before. The Golden Arches had always been a place where people of all backgrounds came together for a meal. But today, something was different. As he approached the counter, the atmosphere shifted. A few employees exchanged glances. One of them hesitated before taking his order, their expression unreadable. A subtle but noticeable energy filled the room. Was it just surprise, or was there something else at play? The restaurant, full of customers, had a mix of reactions. Some people pulled out their phones, eager to capture the moment. Others kept their heads down, pretending not to notice. And then there were those who watched closely, their curiosity growing. What was going on? Was it just the presence of a former president, or was something more personal unfolding? Trump, unfazed, placed his order, but what happened next took everyone by surprise. A quiet but sharp exchange took place between him and one of the employees. It wasn't loud, but it was enough for those nearby to sense the shift. The mood in the restaurant changed in an instant. Would he brush it off? Would he confront the situation? The tension was undeniable, and all eyes were on him. What happened next left the entire restaurant in shock. How did Trump handle the moment? Did he respond with his signature confidence, or did something completely unexpected happen? Stay tuned, because you won't believe how this story unfolds. For a brief moment, the entire McDonald's seemed to freeze. The employee, a young man with a tense expression, stood stiffly behind the register. His hands hovered over the buttons, but he didn't press them. Trump's order was simple, just a burger and fries. But something about the situation made it feel far more complicated. The employee's hesitation wasn't just about being starstruck. There was something else in his eyes, something unspoken. Trump noticed it too. His usual confident stance didn't waver, but there was a flicker of recognition in his gaze. He had been in countless public encounters before, some friendly, some hostile, but this one had a different weight to it. The whispers in the background grew louder. People were nudging each other, their curiosity rising with every passing second. A manager, a woman in her late 40s, stepped forward. Her name tag glinted under the fluorescent lights as she glanced between Trump and the employee. "Everything okay here?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. She wasn't just asking about the order. She was trying to diffuse whatever was happening before it escalated. The young employee hesitated before finally punching in the order, but his body language was clear. Something about serving Trump made him uncomfortable. Was it personal, political, or was there something deeper at play? Trump, always quick to pick up on tension, gave a small smirk, but there was something else behind it, a silent challenge, maybe even curiosity. He leaned in slightly. "Everything good?" he asked, his tone light, almost casual. But it was the kind of casual that carried weight, the kind that demanded an answer. The employee finally spoke, his voice quieter than expected. "Yeah, just wasn't expecting this today." His words seemed neutral, but the energy behind them wasn't. The people in the restaurant were locked in now, eyes darting back and forth between Trump, the employee, and the manager. The air felt thick, like something bigger was just beneath the surface, waiting to come out. But what? And how was Trump going to handle it? The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. People were pretending to go about their meals, but their eyes kept flicking toward the counter. A few phones were still recording, though some had lowered them slightly, not wanting to seem too obvious. The employee's hands hovered near the register, his expression shifting between uncertainty and something deeper. Trump, still standing tall, let the moment hang. He was no stranger to situations like this. Public encounters where unspoken feelings simmered just beneath the surface. His eyes locked onto the young man's for a second longer than necessary. It wasn't anger in his gaze, nor was it amusement. It was something unreadable. The manager, sensing the tension still hadn't broken, stepped in again. "Sir, your order will be right up," she said, her voice forced into a friendly tone. But Trump wasn't in a rush to move. Instead, he turned slightly, glancing around the room, acknowledging the people watching. Some of them smiled at him, some nodded, but a few stayed expressionless. A man sitting in the corner, an older gentleman in a worn-out jacket, leaned toward the person across from him. "You seen this?" he murmured, his voice just loud enough to be overheard. The woman across from him, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly, nodded but kept quiet. The young employee took a slow breath, then finally turned away, stepping toward the back. He didn't say another word, leaving the manager to finish the transaction. The way he left, shoulders tense, steps slightly hurried, wasn't lost on anyone. It wasn't just about politics. There was something personal here, but no one knew what it was yet. A few customers shifted in their seats. One woman whispered to her friend, "What do you think that was about?" Her friend just shrugged, eyes still glued to the counter. Trump took his receipt, giving the manager a small nod before stepping to the side. But something about his expression said he wasn't done with the situation just yet, and neither was the employee. The air inside the McDonald's felt heavier now, as if everyone had picked up on something they couldn't quite name. Trump stood off to the side, arms crossed, his expression unreadable but clearly thinking. The employee had disappeared into the back, but his absence only made the situation feel more unfinished. A few seconds passed, then a minute. The sounds of the restaurant, cash registers beeping, fries sizzling, ice tumbling into cups, felt distant. A couple of customers turned back to their meals, but the tension still lingered. Then, the swinging door to the kitchen pushed open again. The young employee was back. His face was set, his hands clenched at his sides. He wasn't hiding his emotions anymore. He walked straight toward the counter, past the manager, and stopped just a few feet away from Trump. The room seemed to shrink around them. A few people leaned in slightly, waiting. Even the ones who had tried to ignore the moment before couldn't look away now. Trump, sensing something was coming, turned to face him fully. There was no smile now, no casual nod, just a steady, unreadable gaze. The employee took a sharp breath. "I just want to say something," he said, his voice steady but tight. The manager stiffened. "Let's not do this here," she started, but the young man shook his head. "No," he said, louder this time. "I need to." His eyes locked onto Trump's. "You probably don't remember me," he said, "but I remember you." A murmur rippled through the restaurant. People exchanged glances, trying to figure out what this meant. Trump's expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes now, something that almost looked like recognition. The employee's hands curled into fists, then released. His jaw tightened, as if he was struggling with something inside himself. "You said something once," he continued, "something that stuck with me. And now, standing here, I don't know what to do with it." The restaurant was dead silent now. No beeping registers, no rustling bags, just the weight of whatever was about to come next. For a long moment, Trump didn't say anything. The employee stood there, breathing a little heavier now, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. The restaurant was still frozen, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Then, slowly, Trump tilted his head, his eyes narrowing just slightly. "What did I say?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with curiosity. The employee hesitated. His fingers twitched at his sides like he was debating whether to keep going. Then he swallowed hard and said, "It was years ago. You were on TV. I was just a kid. My dad, he hated you. He'd turn off the screen whenever you came on. Said you didn't care about people like us." His voice wavered slightly, but he pressed on. "I believed him. Thought you were just another guy who wouldn't look twice at people like me. But then I heard you say something that didn't match what I was told." The entire room seemed to lean in. Even the manager, who had been trying to keep things professional, had stopped pretending she wasn't listening. Trump didn't blink. And what was that? The employee let out a shaky breath, his anger, his hesitation. It was all mixed with something else now. You said, "They don't want you to win." You weren't even talking about people like me, but for some reason, I felt like you were. He shook his head, frustrated, as if he was still trying to make sense of it. I don't know why it stuck with me. Maybe because I was always told I wouldn't get anywhere, that people like me don't get chances. But when I heard you say it, I started to wonder if I was being lied to. A new kind of silence fell over the restaurant. It wasn't just suspense now. It was something heavier, something personal. Trump studied the young man for a moment, his expression unreadable. The employee took another breath, his voice steadier now. "So, I don't know if I should be mad at you, or thank you." And just when it seemed like things couldn't get any more intense, the restaurant doors swung open, and someone else walked in, someone who was about to change everything. The door swung open with a sharp gust of cold air, cutting through the thick tension in the room. Every head turned toward the entrance, and for a second, even the employee seemed to forget the weight of his own words. A tall man in a dark coat stepped inside, his movements quick and deliberate. His eyes scanned the room, landing almost immediately on Trump. There was something urgent about him, something that made the air feel even heavier. The man strode toward the counter, weaving between customers without hesitation. As he got closer, the employee's expression shifted from confusion to something deeper, recognition. Trump's posture remained firm, but his gaze sharpened, as if he, too, was trying to place the man. Then the stranger finally spoke. "Didn't expect to find you here," he said, his voice steady but carrying an edge. His eyes flicked briefly to the employee before locking back onto Trump. "But since I did, I guess this is the moment." The restaurant held its breath. Even the fryers in the back seemed to go quiet. Trump, never one to back down from intensity, squared his shoulders slightly. "Moment for what?" he asked, his tone calm but unyielding. The man exhaled sharply, his expression unreadable. Then, turning toward the employee, he asked, "Did you tell him yet?" The employee blinked, thrown off by the question. "Tell him what?" The man's gaze didn't waver. "That you're my brother." A stunned silence rippled through the restaurant. The employee's face tightened in shock, his hands clenching at his sides. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice suddenly tense. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned back to Trump. "He's been struggling with this for years," he said, "trying to figure out what to believe, who to believe. I told him the world doesn't work in black and white, but he had to see it for himself." The employee's face was flushed now, emotion battling just beneath the surface. "So this was a setup?" he asked, his voice sharp. "No," the man said firmly, "but maybe it was meant to happen this way." Trump watched the exchange without saying a word. Then finally, he turned back to the young employee. "So," he said, his voice steady, "what do you believe now?" The question lingered in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. The young man looked between Trump and his brother, his mind racing. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure what the answer was. And maybe, just maybe, that was the whole point. The young employee stood frozen, his thoughts a tangled mess. He had spent years convinced of one thing, only to have doubt creep in at the most unexpected moment. His brother's presence only made things more complicated. What was this supposed to mean? That he had been wrong. That everything he believed needed to be questioned. His mind raced for an answer, but none came. Trump didn't press him. He just watched, waiting. The restaurant, still caught in the weight of the moment, felt like it had forgotten to breathe. The employee's brother took a slow step back, as if giving him space to process what had just happened. After what felt like forever, the young man finally let out a breath. "I don't know," he admitted, shaking his head. "I really don't." His voice had lost its edge. It wasn't anger anymore, just raw honesty. Trump gave a small nod, as if he respected the answer. "That's okay," he said simply. "Most people don't." The words landed heavier than expected. For the first time, the employee looked less like someone trying to fight a battle and more like someone realizing the battle itself was bigger than he thought. His brother patted him on the back, a quiet sign that he understood. The restaurant seemed to return to normal, little by little. People turned back to their meals, conversations started up again, and the tension that had held the air so tightly began to loosen. The manager, who had been silently watching the entire time, finally stepped forward. "Your order's ready," she said, handing the bag to Trump with a slight smile, as if relieved the moment hadn't turned into something worse. Trump took it, gave her a nod, and then glanced at the young employee one last time. "Good luck," he said before turning to leave. The employee stood there, watching as Trump walked out the door and disappeared into the world outside. He still didn't have the answers, but for the first time in a long time,